Advent is a time of waiting, and waiting is something that calls forth for patience. I call this sermon, I Want Patience, and I Want It Now. You've all heard that, I'm sure. James, the letter we heard read, is a fascinating piece of literature. I studied it extensively when I was in my graduate studies. And it's something that's not taken as seriously in my mind as it could be. Martin Luther, for example, the famous reformer, called it a letter of straw because he didn't think the gospel was preached adequately in it. The letter, which is really more of a treatise for those who care about such things, claims to be written by James, and the only James that this could possibly be referring to is the brother of Jesus. There are many other James, but the only one who would be recognized as simply James, which is how the letter introduces itself, is the brother of Jesus. And I think sometimes we forget he was a major mover and shaker in the early church. In some ways, more than Peter or any of the other disciples, he was one that was a powerhouse, sort of forgotten sometimes. Whether the letter was actually written by him is another question that I'm not going to get into now. But he speaks about patience, and patience is, I believe, a key to happiness in a very troubled world. In the New Testament, patience often is paired with endurance and hope. Hope is something that the writer of the Hebrews, to the letter to the Hebrews, also probably not really a letter, but whatever. He says, hope is a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul. Now, hope is about a time that is not yet. It's rooted in the future. And it seems strange to call hope an anchor when the future seems so uncertain. An anchor is a symbol of certainty. But hope is built on faith, that is, in trust in God. And even though we don't know the future, we don't know what the future will bring, in trusting in God, there is a kind of certitude of sorts that doesn't require infallible data. We don't need to know the future to rest secure in it. In God, we can look to the future and rest in hope. And the key word there is rest, because I think this rest in hope is another way of speaking about patience. Patience is the ability to be fully in the present and yet sometime, in some way, connected to an unknown future. It sort of projects itself forward. It allows us to be two places at the same time, or perhaps better, two times at the same place, if you will. Here, in unpleasant traffic, right? So you're driving to try to catch the ferry, and there's some construction, and you're going to miss the ferry now. There's nothing you can do about it. Patience is what you project yourself. This too will pass. You're not going to be in this lineup forever. So hope is the ability to project ourselves into a good future, even while we stay grounded in the present. Patience is what flows through us when we do this. So again, hope and patience are intimately connected. Patience allows us to accept an unpleasant present. There's always something about acceptance in patience. Accepting the bad traffic, accepting the possibility that I might miss the ferry. Patience accepts what it cannot control and what it cannot change. Again, knowing that all these things too will pass. James tells us that the farmer, so he uses a couple examples of patience. One is a farmer. The farmer waits for the precious crop from the earth, being patient with it until it receives the early and the late rains. This requires a little bit of unpacking. So first of all, what this suggests is patience works together with hard work. Patience is not another word for inactivity. So the farmer knows what her part of the work is, has to seed, put the seed out, have to harvest and watch for bugs and so forth. But the farmer also knows that without cooperation from nature, it will be to no avail. Without the rain, the seed will die. And the farmer has the power to plant, but the farmer does not have the power to make it rain. In the Middle East, which I came from, and it hasn't changed greatly over the last several centuries or millennia, is a very dry land, and there's often shortage of rain. We know that here, of course, too. Even paradoxically, when it's raining, we're still in a shortage. There's nothing the farmer can do to make it rain. Yet without the rain, all her efforts will be in vain. Worrying about the rain, not worrying about the rain, you can make your choice, but neither is going to make it rain. The farmer hopes for something that may or may not happen. There may be rain, there may not be rain. But there's nothing the farmer can really do to change that. And this is a difficult situation, but one that is best met with patience. But it's sometimes it's a very difficult task to call forth that patience. You go, for example, to the hospital for tests. The tests have been conducted, and now your blood is in the lab being analyzed, but you don't know the results yet, and you have to wait. You have to wait for news that might or might not impact the remainder of your life. This is very, very hard. Some people can rest in God and be patient in those situations. God bless you if you're like that, but many of us are not like that. Many of us are not able to be patient in that kind of situation. Nevertheless, being patient by its very nature will make you less anxious and will open the door to more joy, even in those difficult situations. Again, it might be difficult. If you can't find patience in those situations, I think it's understandable. We've all been there. It's very difficult. And fortunately, we serve a loving God who is patient even when we are not patient. So there's times when we can rest in God's patience, even when we really don't feel it ourselves. And ultimately, our patience is rooted in God, even if we don't feel that tranquility of spirit that we seek. James continues by saying, we must be patient and we must strengthen our hearts. So this is strengthening our hearts and being patient. This suggests to me that patience is something we must practice. It's not something that just falls from heaven. The opening joke that I started with, I want patience and I want it now, ultimately that's not the way it works. You have to, the very nature of patience is something you work on over time. And we will only get better with practice. And this is true for many types of expertise. Any musician will tell us that you might have raw talent, but without patience and practicing, you're not going to be much. Same with swimming. If you're not going to practice, you're not going to be a very good swimmer. Any tedious work, there's the work that goes into it, and you have to do the tedious work, and the payoff is some certain degree of expertise at the end of the line. And if you're not patient and you're not going to put the work in, you're also not going to get the expertise. Other people, and this is a point of patience that I think is really important for all of us, other people can be irritating. I don't know if you've noticed this. The easiest thing to do when someone else is having a bad day, not acting well, is to get irritated with them and react, or to lose one's patience, right? This is what James calls grumbling, complaining about others. When dealing with someone who's testing your patience, one key, there's many things involved, I'm sure, but one thing to do is to not react to what the person is saying, but rather keep in mind God and react to this future, this unknown future that's rooted in God. And this, as it were, is like a pressure release that allows us not to get triggered, or at least it can function that way. Again, this is very difficult sometimes to achieve. Patience is not an easy virtue to master. And it's interesting that James goes on to talk about the patience of the prophets and the patience of Job. The word endurance could be translated as patience in the text. And this is interesting because if you read the book of Job, he's really not that patient a fellow. He does not calmly sit back and accept his suffering. At least he starts off that way, but eventually he ends up arguing with God and with his so-called friends. And from Job, we learn that sometimes patience is not a fully appropriate response, or at least not what we might call standard patience. I think patience is always helpful, but there are times, if you're in an abusive relationship, the advice to be patient with your abusive partner is probably not very helpful information. More helpful would be leave your abusive partner and try and find healing and maybe reconciliation down the road, but don't subject yourself in patience to an abusive situation. Being patient with unjust situations can quickly become complicity. Justice delayed is justice denied. So there are times when patience, I think patience is helpful even in unjust situations, but sometimes it has to be a patience that's mixed with a degree of impatience, an impatient patience. The prophets, who, again, James references, they often were trying to move Israel or sometimes other nations towards the arc of justice, and were quite impatient with them as they did not want to be just. They had what might be called an impatient patience. So may we all have the wisdom to know, this is the serenity prayer in a nutshell, the serenity to know the things that require patience and the things that require a holy impatient patience, if you will. May we follow the example of the prophets and of Job and learn about a patience that demands justice, a patience that rests in God, even as we battle the forces of ignorance and discrimination. May we be patient with each other, with ourselves, and may we learn to be patient with our own failed efforts at being patient. Most importantly, may we rest in the infinite patience of God, who loves us all regardless of how often we lose it with ourselves or with each other or with God. And may we rest in God's transcendent patience that embraces the whole world in love. Amen.